Center at Democracy International, and we're here doing this in collaboration with our friends at European Citizen Action Service. We have Sylvia in the room with us here today. We have Lisa online, and then we'll also hear from Sarah Hendel, who's our expert speaker today from Democracy board member, who will be telling us about the different digital initiatives in Germany. First, a couple of house rules. You heard already the recording started, so we would like to publish this after the event. So if you have any privacy issues with that, please turn off your camera, please rename yourself, and then we can have that taken care of. This will also be a co-creation session, as we've also mentioned. So just have another device available, maybe your phone, where then you can take part in the interactive Slido. Or have another tab open on your laptop, and that way you can take part in the second session of the day. I also want to mention that we have an option for closed captioning. You can also read subtitles on Zoom. We've enabled that. And the way you can turn that on, it should be in your menu bar at the bottom. You might have to click on more, but then you see an option for subtitles, and we can turn that on. I'm going to say it's an automatic closed captioning, and we tested it out yesterday, and sometimes there's a funny interpretation by Zoom on what we were saying. So I hope it's as accurate as possible, but I can't promise it's 100% accurate, but I hope that you'll still be able to follow us. And now lastly, I just want to go over the agenda of the day before I hand it over to our speakers. So we'll just share the screen in just a second here. So while that's sharing, we know already we start today at 3 o'clock. We're going to go to about 5 o'clock today, and this is just where we're going to go over now a little bit the welcome, get a little bit familiar with the topic. I'm then going to hand it over in just a minute to our expert presenting digital initiatives in Germany. Looking at what Germany has done, and I can say, at least during the COVID time, Germany has moved into the direction of digitalization, but things are not perfect here. I'm sure we'll hear by Sarah how things could be improved, and also more inclusive to meet the needs of marginalized groups. Then we're going to have a short Q&A session with Sarah. So if you have any questions, that's the time that you can also ask her. And then we're going to get to the core of the presentation and of the day, which is the co-creation session that's being led by Lisa. And this is where you're going to want to have your second device ready or another tab on your laptop ready. And then we're going to be using Slido for that. Very important, at the end of today, we need you to participate in a deep survey. We're going to have all the information on the screen again. So that's going to be the QR code that you see on the screen here. The ones that are here in the room with you have it on your agenda in front of you. So we please ask, it's very important that that you take that survey at the end. And all the information you'll need for the first few questions of that survey is going to be on the screen. We're going to come back to that at the end, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple of reminders for this also from our friends from ECAS, but that's also very hard. So for now, I want to hand it over to you, Sarah. So tell us a little bit about digital initiatives in Germany and what we can learn, and so we can get the discussion started.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniela and everybody. It's nice to be here with you today, and I'm going to share my presentation that I prepared. And as Daniel already said, I'm going to be talking about digital democracy in Germany, and I have to call it first steps because I think that's where we are. Just to set the context a little bit, I think all people who are in this call kind of agree that representative democracy is not enough anymore, that we need to open up democracy for the diversity of citizens' needs and interests more, and that we need a new political culture that acknowledges our differences, but also creates spaces, new spaces for consensus finding. and for the renewal of trust between citizens and politicians, but also between citizens themselves, because also there a lot of mistrust has been inserted because of social media and other developments that we all, I think, experience on a daily basis. And another thing is that democracy needs to activate society's resources more intensively, so that we can actually say that we live in a lively democracy, and so that we actually manage to transform our societies to sustainability. And knowing that we need to develop democracy, it makes total sense to start this task and integrating the digital dimension in it. And I mean, it's kind of a good moment that we start now of thinking of new concept of how to integrate people in democracy. And I think that the digital dimension of it is not yet used to its full potential. So we can see there was the big Corona push, and I mean, the Corona pandemic suddenly pushed all of us into the world of online meetings, and also this was the case with digital democracy, like with democracy experiments like citizen assemblies, because that's what we saw when Corona happened, that planned citizen assemblies had to be transferred into the online spaces. And I think it is always just surprising that it does work too. I mean, the same thing that works when we meet in person often also works online, but it sometimes takes a push for us to try it out. And the effect was, in this case, quite obvious, that the citizens became more diverse when we make online meetings instead of in-person meetings on citizen assemblies. And one example for that was our citizen assembly on Corona politics that we had here in my Bundesland, Baden-Württemberg. But I mean, that was just a push already before governments in Germany had started to experiment with digital participation. But I would say it currently is about the following bullet points. It's about reaching more people, lower the barriers of participation, bringing more diverse perspectives into the process, allow citizens agenda setting, and to make public administrations more transparent. It is not yet about bringing in a new in-depth quality of interaction and solution finding. So this is, I will explain this later a little bit more. I think the digital realm is not yet used for the potential it actually gives us. But I want to, and that's what I promised, Daniela, I want to show you the examples that we already have here in Germany. So I want to show you the highlights in Germany that already integrate digital aspects. And one which is actually over Germany, like beyond the borders known, is I think the example of the city of Hamburg, that they have a transparent government online database, which is very extensive. So they have all the information in the administration. They have it published automatically online. So everybody who wants to get this information can just go to the website and get it. And this just underlines the precondition of transparency for an active civil society, because if you have all the information that the government also has, then it is way more easy for citizen initiatives, for the media, for all the other actors in the society to actually start initiatives or start debates on the topics that are important to them.
Sure.
But
one question, are you sharing your screen right now, because we don't see your screen share?
You're not okay.
No, we don't know if you already started with the PowerPoint.
I did. Why didn't you say? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You pick up where you left off. Yeah, now.
Now you see it.
Yeah, I see everyone else nodding too.
So okay.
Now we can see.
So perfect. So we were at the Hamburg case. So Hamburg has this transparent government database. And as I already said, it is used widely, but the biggest surprise was that the administration itself was the biggest user, because they also profited from having an open and accessible knowledge base. So they could access their information between the government agencies. They could access this better with this database. So it was not also a win for the public, it was also a win for the administration itself. In Baden-Württemberg, another example, we have the so-called Beteiligungsplatform. It is an online participation platform which allows people to make comments on proposed legislature. It works like the ministries can decide by themselves which legislation they want to put there, and then citizens have a certain amount of time of commenting on it. And if it works out good, then the legislative proposal can be adjusted towards the point the citizens brought in. And also citizens can vote on other citizens' comments, so that the administration can see which proposals are gaining other support of other people. We have in the Bundesland of Thüringen a very good digital platform for public petitions. It's an agenda setting tool where people can start petitions for the regional level or for the local level. And when they collect 1,500 online signatures in 6 weeks, they get a public hearing in the petitions committee of the parliament. So it is a good possibility of putting public pressure on a topic that is important to the people and have a direct entry into the parliament and get a discussion there. Then we have, and this is also actually a single case, we have one Bundesland, Schleswig-Holstein, which is offering online collection in the process of direct democracy. That means that you can sign online the first step towards a binding referendum. It means that you can propose an initiative and you can collect the signatures online. But as it is a binding process, not everybody can just sign. It is clear that you have to be identified as a citizen who has the right to sign that. So this process can only be done if you have an online ID that can identify you as a citizen of that Bundesland. And unfortunately, the usage of online ID is still very low. It's estimated around 20% of people have the online ID. And so we have to acknowledge that up to now, it is the possibility of signing the initiatives online is not used very much up to now. But it has potential as long as people go to the online ID as a regular device of usage. Yeah, then we have some cities that do citizens' budget processes. I just picked one of them. There are several, which is the city of Jena. They have an annual budget of 100,000 euros. It's not so much, but it is a start that can be spent towards project that the citizens propose. So they have an 8-week collection phase of proposals on the platform, and proposals can cost up to 10,000 euros. And then 6 weeks of voting on the proposals, where everybody gets 5 votes that they can split or accumulate towards the proposals. And of the 29 proposals last year, 14 were implemented or on the way of being implemented. But you see, I mean, sorry, I want to go back. We see that it's not that much people who actually take part. And I also looked at other citizen budget processes, and we have to say that the reach of these projects is not too far. So people don't really notice it that much, but it still works in the sense of that there are implemented proposals. Yeah, we can see that several cities, I mean, I would say around 30 cities or other governmentary governments on other levels have started to use participation platforms as a general hub for participation. So we often actually say that Consul is a good open source software which provides citizens with the possibility of informing their citizens, engage their citizens, of organizing inputs and organizing debates, and let citizens also vote and make decisions on proposals. And cities start to experiment with that. Most of the cities just started to do one or two projects with this kind of digital platform, but we see that it's still the first steps. Like there is still some problems and not that much engagement on these platforms, because I think that people just don't know about it. And I think there's not much public advertisement to actually tell people to go there and to tell people what they can do there, and that it is a possible way for them to influence actual political decisions. Yeah, so I think for harvesting the potential of digital democracy, you have actually to establish one platform where citizens can do everything, like get all the information, do the debates, and actually are able to make decisions. But it needs to be like more clear. Often it's not that clear to the people what is actually happening on that platform, and there's not that good transparency about the process. And often you don't actually see that participation changes anything. So on the platforms, it is hard to actually make people like feel convinced that their contribution is actually changing real politics. And I think that should be the case more. And the biggest challenges in Germany definitely are that we have in general a slow digitalization process in public administration. Like also in comparison to other countries, we are way behind, and that just means that in our administrative staff, there is not much digital know-how. And that also explains why they are not that open for digital participation, because if you don't use digital tools in your daily life, it is hard to actually create good digital processes. And also there's not that much know-how about participation process in general in the administration. Like it's not that people there have the resources or the know-how to create and design good processes that actually integrate also the outcome of participation into the normal policy cycle. And as far as I could see, there was in all the projects, there was no specific orientation towards bringing in more minorities. Like, I mean, in general, the barriers of participation are lower if you do online participation, because people don't need to have the time to go to an event, but there was no specific approaches to reach minorities or other groups that are not often present in participation processes. Yeah, so I think for the future, it is the goal to make it more about quality and not quantity. For sure, the next level will be to use artificial intelligence in the process of participation, because there are already tools which help you identify relevant topics and consensus base just from analyzing of interaction of people. But therefore, you have to have a lot more like data. That means that you need to organize good debates and stuff, and you need to bring people in more. And then you can actually use artificial intelligence of identifying the topics that are really important to them, and also maybe where is the consensus space between different people with different perspectives. And I also think that we need to get inspired a lot more by the good examples that we have in the world. And for me, it had always been Taiwan, the country who uses up to now the most creatively digital tools to advance their democracy and to tie it more closely to the people and to their interests. So I'm gonna end with that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really interesting. Thank you for putting this background for us. Now we learn a little bit about what Germany is doing well, maybe what it's not doing so well. There are a couple of questions in the chat, and maybe with the screen sharing, we can also share them here. Okay. So Sarah, you can see there's a question by Maybe make it smaller. Just scroll. About Hamburg, especially, what needs to be done to further strengthen transparency? And there's another question by Frank also about the face-to-face meetings and dialogues. You mentioned already a little bit citizens assemblies. And there's a third question also by Frank. Maybe you can combine this a bit in a reaction. And for everybody else too, you can use the chat to ask a question, or you can also use the raise hand function in Zoom if you'd like to speak up.
Okay. Okay, about Hamburg. Well, I mean, Hamburg is really already a case where we can see how it really works to be totally transparent in government policies. Like they really have an extensive database of all the documents, information, on the background information also that politicians have when they take decisions. So, I mean, I would be happy if every Bundesland had such a good transparency law and transparency database as Hamburg has, because that is the first step to everything. But already that aim has to do a lot with digitalization, because if you don't have digitalized administrations, then transparency is a lot of work, because then you have to like transfer all the information from offline to online. Then you have to fill out like private information or protected information by hand. Like it is a lot of work if you are not digitalized. If you are a digitalized administration, that is basically, then it's basically you one click and you can share all the information with the public. So to be more transparent in government, we first have to get all the governments and administrations working fully online based and digitally. And that is the first step and preconditions for that. And on the other way, in Hamburg, it was the other way around. You first had the aim of being transparent, and then the administration had to be digitalized to do that. I think in the other countries, it will be more the other way around, because in Hamburg, we were only able to achieve this kind of transparency because we had a direct democracy initiative that asked for it. Okay, Daniela, some of the questions are very long, so I have to scroll through it a bit. What politicians who sound to the best fishing answers? Okay, what politicians in Germany are the best at reaching out? You mean from which party? I guess it was.
I mean persons. I mean individuals. For example, reaching out via social media or various digital platforms to get let's say experiences or knowledge from outside.
Yeah, I have to say that we don't have a lot of politicians who are doing that yet. Like, this culture of that the politicians feel that they are like so open to everybody, and everybody could just come into their speaking sessions, and that they are open to listening, and everybody can write them an email. So this is still the culture that they think like they are open and accessible for everybody. So they don't really, I personally don't know many examples of politicians who actually are reaching out via structured online approaches to get feedback from citizens or input from citizens on a structural base.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question in the chat, Sarah, maybe you want to pick up from Erwin about digital democracy. If it's seen as safe as analog democracy.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of fears around digital direct democracy. I mean, that is a slow process also, because I mean, we still have some kind of a problem of identification. And I mean, it is understandable that for binding processes that at the end have binding decisions, that they want to have good identification systems. I mean, it's gonna go better because we have a better application now, a smartphone application that can be used in connection with the online ID. And I think when people start to using that more, then we will have a development that will allow people to also collect signatures for direct democracy initiatives online. And I think for other forms like participation processes, it is not that relevant that you have an identification that the citizens are actually specific criteria that they need to meet. I mean that for participation, they're just happy if a lot of people take part, because right now the problem really is that there's just really small numbers in the projects that cities or that the governments offer. Mostly people don't really react to it, so we don't have the problem yet that there is mistrust in the things that come in. Okay, then we have another question. To what extent can signatures? Yeah, I mean, that's what I already said. At this moment, it is only in one Bundesland that on the Bundesland level that you can actually collect signatures online. And on the Bundes level, we don't even have a direct democracy. So there obviously is no possibility of doing it online.
Okay, there's no hands raised or any other questions from the chat. Then thank you very much, sir. We're right exactly on time. Great, so thank you so much. We're going to ask you to stay with us because in the co-creation session, we might come back to you. You might want to react to the responses that we get. And I think this really helped us in the next session, the main part of this event. So I'm going to hand it right now over to Sylvia from ECAS, who's going to introduce Elisa and the next part of the event.
Hello, thank you very much for having us and thanks for being here to this event. I am Silvia Demifonti, and with me we have Elisa Lironi from ECAS, European Citizen Action Service. I am the Accessibility and Equity Manager, and Elisa is the Program Director of the European Democracy Focus Area at ECAS. ECAS is an NGO that is Brussels-based. We have over 30 years of experience, and our mission is to empower citizens by promoting and defending citizens' rights and developing and supporting mechanisms to increase citizen and citizen organizations' democratic participation in and engagement with the EU. And the ultimate goal is really to create a more inclusive and stronger European Union. And that's why we're also here today to talk about a digital transformation that is really inclusive. This event today is organized under the operating grant framework called Eureka 23 specifically, which is co-funded by the Citizen Equality, Rights and Values, the CERV program of the European Commission. I hope that there will be time during the session, but also after the session with the people that are here in person to take the conversation further. And for those that are online, I will now put our contacts in the chat so you can reach out to us if you want to share other opinions and ideas of topics that will not be covered during today's sessions for time constraints. So I now pass the floor to Elisa. Elisa, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me, Daniela? All good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone, and thank you very much for participating to this event today. And yes, as Sylvia was explaining, we are part of the European Citizen Action Service, which is an NGO based in Brussels, and we have been for many years now empowering citizens to exercise their rights in the EU. So basically, we work on two focus areas, which is on EU rights and EU democracy, and my expertise is on digital democracy. So I will now share a presentation with all of you, just to explain the context in which we're here today. And afterwards, we will start also our co-creation session, where you will be the main actors, and we will be asking you actually to answer to online questions through Slido, to have your perspective about how the digital transformation is going in Europe, but especially in your country, so Germany. And we're curious to see all of the results, because we're actually going to 10 different member states doing exactly the same activity in order to have a comparative analysis in the end of the results and see which countries have certain opinions about digital transformation in Europe. So I'm just going to share my screen. Here you go. And I hope that everyone can see it. There you are. There you go. Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen and there are no problems. Today we're here talking about digital transformation. And actually at ICAS, we have started this process already a couple of years ago. You know, most probably that when the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was elected, she made a promise at the European Parliament and saying that she would launch a conference on the future of Europe, which is basically citizens panels in which citizens would have the say on different EU policies, and that all of these citizens would convene into these citizens panels and have the opportunity to actually talk together with policymakers and come up with recommendations on different policies in the next for the next few years. So this actually happened. It ended last year in summer, and now basically the Commission is taking up these contributions. So at the time when this was launched, the main target audience were, of course, the citizens, the main contributors, and civil society didn't really have a role in this. So what was created was the Civil Society Convention on the Conference of the Future of Europe, which is a network of more than 90 organizations all across Europe that decided to form a coalition and to also give their own contributions on the same policies that citizens and EU representatives were basically working on. And then through that convention, basically, we also had a seat in the sessions in Strasbourg. Also, Democracy International was part of this whole process. And we actually had a say in being the mediators between the citizens and the representatives on these contributions and policies. So what happened was that ICAS was not only part of the board of this convention, but was also tasked to manage the digital transformation cluster, meaning we divided the different policies according to what the EU representatives were asking to citizens. And ICAS was leading the digital transformation policy cluster. And we worked together with other civil societies all across Europe to basically work on the topics and subtopics that feeds into the European Union's priority of the digital age fit for all. And this is a 10-year program that should be until 2030. So what we were looking at was especially the values and the ethics that civil society organizations wanted to bring into the digital transformation in Europe. And what we did was basically we implemented a sort of crowdsourcing activity. We opened up a platform, and we also had like meetings with civil society organizations to come up with a policy paper on digital transformation altogether. The digital transformation paper that we came up with in the convention, so with all these civil societies, touched upon 5 different topics. And these 5 topics are the same ones that we will be talking about today all together with you. First one is digital democracy. So we heard already a few aspects of it with Sarah. Then we also focused a lot on digital education. we focused on digital safeguards, we focused on defending rights and freedoms online, and last but not least, we also focused on digital economy. And of course, now in the co-creation session, I will tell you what the recommendations of civil society was with in all of these different subtopics, and then we'll give you the part to actually tell us what you feel about these topics. And the questions are not technical. It is not meant to be an expert answer that you need to give, but the answers that you will give us a perception of how you feel the digital transformation is going now in Europe, and what can be improved by EU policymakers. So last year, well, this is just basically to show you how we did the crowdsourcing with the civil society. We collected ideas, we selected the ideas, we formulated the policy together, and we came up with the paper. So we generated 216 ideas and recommendations, which represented around 1,200 civil society across Europe. So these are the recommendations that I will be showcasing today. And these were some of the working group civil society members. As you can see, these are not NGOs that were working specifically on digital policies. That's what's interesting. For example, we had the European Disability Forum, we had the Federalist, we had the Local Democracy Association, we had the Anti-Poverty Network. So as you can see, this is really about a digital transformation that is trying to be inclusive, that is trying to be accessible, which is kind of what civil society thinks is missing at the moment in the digital transformation. So now I would just like you all to just connect on Slido so that we can do one test and see how familiar are you with basically what's happening in the digital transformation in Europe. So please kindly just use the QR code if you have a mobile phone. And then the passcode is inclusion, or you can go on the slido.com website and insert also the hashtag and the password as well. And please kindly answer to this question. Okay, I see that the answers are coming in. Just keep going. And yeah, we already have 18 participants, and it's good to see that most people here have some basic knowledge or not at all, which is absolutely great, because in the end of the day, the whole point of this event is also to go through certain recommendations altogether. And this is also to test out if your Slido is working, because obviously we'll be using Slido. So you can keep this Slido open, because it will basically, while I'm speaking, the questions will appear on your screen at a certain point. So now that you're connected, you can keep this this online page open for you, both on your mobile apps and also on your computer. Okay. So. All right, perfect. So I see that there is some basic knowledge, which is absolutely great. 33% is completely new to the topic. Some have a solid background and 4% an expert. That's wonderful. So we have a mixed group, and it's good to know that I hope that you'll be looking forward to knowing more about digital transformation. Perfect. Okay, so we can start the co-creation session. During the presentation, you will get a question and answer box, of course, in your Slido screen, and then we will have basically a presentation of the subtopic, one of the 5 ones that I told you about, and then we'll have the part in which you will answer to the Slido polls, and then we'll look at the results together. So the first topic that I mentioned was about digital democracy. And basically, it is what Sarah was explaining about the use of information and communication technology in ICT and also in government's processes. So here, this is actually also my expertise. So I have divided this part in after researching it for a long time through the literature into 3 big aspects of digital democracy. The first one is e-government, and this is the use of information and communication technology mainly for public administration and for governmental processes. So for example, when we talk about e-identity card, or any way that you can actually do, you can pay your taxes online, for example. Those are all e-government services that are provided to citizens. The second one is e-transparency, and this is all of the online mechanisms that the government allows citizens to be more aware about the policies that they're implementing, the legislations, through online services and online transparency. And the last one, the third one and the fourth one are closely connected, and it's about e-participation. So meaning how citizens and governments can interact using ICT in order to co-create policies together, or allow citizens at least to have a more active say in the legislative procedures that the government is running, or in policy making processes. And of course, e-voting, e-elections is also part of e-participation, and it is the possibility, of course, to have online ballots and or even electronic polling stations, etc. So when we discussed about this subtopic with the group of civil society organizations, immediately the main challenges emerged that were the ones that were kind of similar to what Sarah was explaining around ensuring accessibility, ensuring inclusiveness, and ensuring transparency. So you will see that these challenges actually will pop up constantly also in the other subtopics, because in the end of the day, with civil society organizations, we really focused a lot on inclusiveness, on accessibility, on making sure that the digital gap and the digital divide are reduced. And then, so how do we solve these problems? So basically, we touched upon the different e-government, e-transparency, e-participation, etc. And we thought about concrete actions and recommendations to propose to the European Union. First of all, to make free, equal, affordable internet a fundamental right. So this has already been done, for example, in Finland. In Finland, basically having affordable free internet is almost a human right. It means that every citizen in Finland has the right to have fast speed connection in order for the citizen to access in e-government services or other possibilities such as e-education, etc. So this is something that we call the European Union to do, to make it a fundamental right for every citizen to actually have the internet, since nowadays the internet serves in a very fundamental way to also, be part of society. The second one is also to provide public services that are fully accessible, especially for hard to reach segments of the population. When we talk about accessibility, we talked about people with vulnerabilities. So people, for example, that have a certain age, so seniors, but also young people on the other side, but also the homeless, migrants. We talked about also people with disabilities, etc. And we think that the most important thing here is that also civil society organizations receive certain funding and in order to basically help citizens in this digital transition. The third point is to ensure publicly financed software of the public sector are open source. So basically, one thing that we stressed a lot is how private companies are also making a lot of money, sometimes from coding systems, etc. And certain governmental services should be more open source. So this is something that civil society was also pushing for. The fourth one is to also combine new methods of engagement. And here it's about digital democracy, like e-participation. So for example, participatory budgeting or crowdsourcing processes or e-consultation. So the methods that Sarah was also talking about, to combine this together with different ways of citizen engagement. So if you have, a citizen panel, which is offline, you should have a multilingual platform as well, or an online platform together, also online consultations, etc. And the fifth one is to pilot e-voting in the next European elections, which are going to be next year. So this is something that civil society has also been pushing for, because e-voting has certain benefits, especially for EU mobile citizens that cannot vote unless they're at home in their own country. So it has been proven that e-voting also brings certain benefits. However, the caveat here is that civil society organizations obviously have stressed that if we want e-voting, the system needs to be 100% secure from hackers, from dysfunctions, from manipulation of votes, etc., and fully accessible, of course. So e-voting, yes, but only if certain things are ensured. So now we can start the co-creation session. So I would like you all to go to your Slido once again. And we have a series of questions now that you will see, and I invite you to simply to answer to these questions. I'll read them out once and then we'll give you 5 minutes to answer. So as you can see, it's, do you regularly use online e-government public services in Germany? Do you prefer public administration services to be online or offline? Do you find it easy to access these governmental information? So for example, when there's a legislation process, is it easy for you to find out what's happening with that piece of law or in the policy-making process, etc.? Do you find it easy to access information of the EU, of the European Commission, of the European Parliament, of the Council, etc.? And do you ever use e-participation tool to voice your idea? So for example, if there's a governmental consultation in Germany, did you ever participate, or participatory budgeting at the local level, e-petitions, etc.? Would you be comfortable in voting online at the next European elections? Yes, no. And here, these are 2 open questions. And could you please state what are the main challenges according to you in accessing e-government services online? And what do you think should be improved in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness in democracy? So we'll give you 5 minutes now, and then we'll go through the answers all together later on. Okay, so just one more minute. I just see a few people are answering, are finishing. Okay, so can start seeing the results. So do you regularly use online e-government public services in Germany? There is a 70% of you who has answered no, actually. 13% yes, and 13% sometimes. So most of you don't actually access online e-government public services, which is interesting. And maybe later I'll also hand the floor to Sarah if she wants to comment on some things that are happening in Germany, which might explain also this the results in these polls. Do you prefer public administration services to be online or offline? Most people actually prefer online. And this is interesting because most people actually don't use the e-government services online. So I'm curious to ask if they don't exist in Germany that are that important, or because they're not as accessible, or what is the reason for this? Do you find it easy to access online governmental information? Sometimes, with 53%, no 33%, I don't know 11%, and yes also 11%. So basically finding government information online is sometimes okay, and for, let's say, 30%, it's actually not okay. Do you find it easy to access online information about the EU? So this is more not about Germany, but it's about the EU institutions. Sometimes, again, 32%, yes, which is higher here. So I guess it's a bit easier to find information online about the EU compared to what's happening maybe in legislative procedures in Germany. Did you ever use an e-participation tool? Yes. That would also be interesting to, if you want, you can write also in the chat the ones that you've been using, if you want to share it with the others. Would you be comfortable in voting online at the next European elections? I'm happy to report that there's 80% actually of you that has said yes to this. So it's very interesting to see this from different parts of Europe, because some countries trust less online voting and others actually trust it much more. As we know, in Estonia, there's the best case of e-voting systems. It has been existing for many years now. And now, like, the majority of the population actually uses online voting comfortably. So what do you think is the main challenge to accessing e-government services? Here we have a few questions. Low digital literacy, so low level of know-how, so digital skills, really. Websites sometimes are too complex, too difficult, and not user-friendly in terms of design and technology. Of course, in certain countries and continents, such as in Africa, it's hard since the internet is not easily accessible. And it's not only in Africa that it's like that, but it's also in certain rural parts of Europe. We've seen this happening very, very often, that there's less connection to the internet in those territories. Then we need more service-oriented mindset in administration, absolutely. That sees government as a supportive tool to fulfill their task. And then there are many technical problems sometimes online that are very important to solve. Okay, very interesting. See, okay. And yes, then what should be improved in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness as well in digital democracy? Focus on simplicity, user-friendliness, strengthening technology instructions. Online information has to be also easy. It's interesting. Also, the services of the government UK website in plain English. Internet should be made accessible for everyone, and also mobile apps need to be also user-friendly. Perfect. So, Sarah, is there anything that you would like to say according to the results that you've seen also, and according to your experience on how people use digital democracy?
Yeah. And I mean, the first question, I had to laugh a bit because I really think in German administration, there is not much e-government services that actually is offered. So people cannot actually use it. And if there is so less, then people also don't know about the few things that they are, because they just don't get even the idea that it could be happening. So I always think that if governments or administrations go digital, they have to have some kind of campaigns to promote these kind of new possibilities to do that online, because they just do it, but they don't tell people about it.
Yeah,
if they
absolutely.
do it.
Yeah. And anything else that was interesting according to you, according to the results that we saw?
I also was impressed that already 80% would be ready to vote online, because
Yeah.
I'm also a strong I'm optimistic that it will be. I mean, it's never 100% sure, as it is. The elections are now also not 100% sure. They can always be made.
Exactly.
It's never 100%, but I think it can be secure enough, and I think the benefits are so extensive. And not only for voting in elections, I would even say for voting also in referendums, because it is a huge task, I mean, to organize a referendum in a country, or even when you think that once upon in time we will have Europe-wide referenda. I mean, that would be such a big cost to organize it, a Europe-wide referendum. But if you could do it online, the cost would low so much, and people would get involved in debates around topics. So I think we should go in that direction quickly. But I was surprised that people were open to that here. That's a good news.
Yeah, it is interesting to see. As I said, we're doing this in different countries all across Europe, and we've had very different results also according to the participation culture that these citizens have in that specific country. So it's also interesting to see the differences. Okay, perfect. So we can move to our next topic, actually. Let me see. There you go, which is digital economy. We'll start with this one, well, a second. And digital economy might seem a bit complicated, but it's actually the development of an economy that is based on digital computing. And these are the concepts that we basically touched upon in civil society discussions. And it's no problem that you don't know all of the terms in a very precise way, because in any case, the questions will be very simple. But just to give you a bit of knowledge about these topics, Digital Industry 4.0 is referring to all those concepts that are around the Internet of Things, cloud computing. So it is the transformation basically of the industry production. So the merging of digital technology and the Internet with the traditional conventional industries. So that's what it means. Then we also have the term digital finance, which is the implication and the impact of technology on traditional financing services. And it can include a variety of products, applications, processes, business models, etc., that has transformed the traditional financial services into more digital. Then data economy is the creation of a single market for data in the EU, where the data can flow across the sectors to benefit all, and the rules for access and the data are fair, practical, clear, and respected. So it is basically the single market for data. Then when we talk about digital economy, it is important to link it also to environmental issues. And here civil society has also been supporting the green digital solutions, mainly the use of technology for the benefit of the environment, deploying and investing more digital green technologies to achieve climate neutrality and accelerate the climate and digital transitions in priority sectors of Europe. So this was something that was very much pushed upon among civil society. We also touched upon a bit the welfare, social welfare in the digital age. So meaning how technology and digital transformation has an impact on public welfare services. And last but not least, the use of technology in businesses or in companies. So here, it's all of those new services, a bit disruptive sometimes, that you find, such as Uber, Amazon, Deliveroo, and things like that. So it is really how to create new value in business models by using technology, by creating benefits and customer experiences, etc. Again, the main challenges here in digital economy was always about ensuring accessibility. And here, more specifically about data, the creation of a single market for data in the European Union for the civil society was quite a complex topic. Some proposed actions, these are not all of them, but of course we can always send you the full report, was to support digitally and socially excluded groups. So with funds, with resources, with digital transition programs. So the people who should be targeted here are those left behind due to inaccessibility, unavailability, or unaffordability of technologies due to their lack of connectivity and digital skills. So in order to be part of the digital economy, obviously you need all of these elements. The second point was to introduce corporate tax rules. So some of the recommendations were very, very precise on specific topics. But here about tax rules, it was just to make sure that profits are registered and taxed based on businesses where geographically they have significant interaction through digital channels. And then the important thing about establishing more central pools of advisors that can help citizens. So this can also not only help citizens, but also smaller companies that usually want to improve. And so these pool of advisors could advise them on how to have more knowledge about technologies that they could use, sustainable practices, etc. And then the last one is obviously a topic which is very much discussed about, which is about cryptocurrencies. And here the European Union is working on a regulation to improve the market in crypto assets regulation. And this must be something that has to be regulated at the EU. That's what civil society are thinking. And also to create a single taxonomy, and it must be clear which assets fall against the regulation. So this one is particularly interesting because what happened here was that when there was the Ukrainian invasion by Russia, we have seen very, very different ways of using, cryptocurrencies on the side of the Ukraine, on the side of Russia. So here, the reasoning behind cryptocurrencies that need to be regulated was also due to this situation. And so there are situations in which authoritarian regimes can try to circumvent, for example, global sanctions via crypto assets. And so this was kind of a debate that we were having in the civil society organization last year about the regulation and the harmonization of rules around cryptocurrency. And you can agree or not, but this is just one of the, the discussions that we were having and that I'm sharing here. Okay, so we can all go back to Slido now, and then there will be just a few questions on digital finance and digital economy. Do you think digital finance and the impact of new technologies on the financial services industries is accessible for everyone? So, for example, e-banking services. Do you use your banking on your mobile accounts? Do you make transfers with your phone, etc.? And then there is also this question on what could be the way to increase the accessibility to these services. Do you see the use of technology to create new value business models, customer experience, and the internal capabilities that support its core operations as a good or a bad thing for our society? So the creation of Uber, Amazon, all of these services, do you consider it more a positive thing for a society, or is it really disruptive for society and we should go back to where we were maybe a few decades ago? Any other suggestions on how to make our digital economy more inclusive? And so, yes, these are the few questions that we have. So I'll give you 5 minutes to just answer them. Okay, so we can start checking the answers. Do you think digital finance, the impact of new technologies, is accessible? 76% of you have said no. So there is an issue with accessibility for everyone to access this digital finance and digital economy. What could be done to improve the accessibility to these services? So via the municipalities in a secured way, the importance of education, clearly that makes it very important, especially digital skills. So more individual tutoring, so making sure that certain parts of society, such as elderly citizens or adults with lower education, are particularly targeted when we try to teach people skills. And also to make sure that decreased differences in incomes, etc., is not so big. So the differences between incomes is not so big, so that everyone can actually access the technology and have technologies. So also to improve the accessibility of all citizens, adjusting login mechanisms, etc. Then this is always an interesting question for me to see if you think that these sorts of new technologies and services are actually disruptive to our society, if they're a good or a negative thing for our society. And most 50% says mainly sometimes good and sometimes bad, but there's almost another 50% that says that it's mainly good. So very few of you actually think that these are not good services that are being implemented to improve our society. Other suggestions on how to make a digital economy more inclusive: limiting corporate power, age-appropriate training courses, and on the opportunities and risk of these services, more crowdsourcing platforms, so to improve numerous issues, including AI, avoiding digital economy to become a requirement, so always to complement the digital with the non-digital, having more European-wide regulations and seeing how digital economy needs to be implemented, what features need to be included so that inclusiveness and accessibility are ensured. The instruments themselves are good, but the examples provided have business models aimed at destroying the existing market and don't abide existing law concerning competition, labor, and consumer protection. So definitely something to improve there on competition law. Mobile phones and laptops more for the low-income households and poor people, and regulations on bigger players in the technological field. Okay, that's perfect. Sarah, would you like to comment on anything regarding Germany about this?
Well, that's actually not my expertise field, so I cannot really say something to that field. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I will always ask after every subtopic. So if you see anything interesting that you think that plays a role, just let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can move to the next topic, which is around digital rights. So the rights that you have in the digital world. And here, once again, we were looking at different concepts that you can see, and I'll just go through them quickly. So for digital rights, we really mean defending rights and freedoms online. So secure and sustainable digital infrastructures and the right for everyone to have access to these infrastructures. Here, the different concepts, as you can see, were, for example, digital citizenship. So a framework of digital rights and principles that can help and uphold EU values in the digital space. Then also the right to digital services, the right to fair, transparent, and accountable digital services. Online privacy, which is how much the level of privacy protection is there when you're online, and the right to have this privacy online. Information, the right to access information given by government. So it's a bit like e-transparency. So the more people know, the better. The right to the internet, net neutrality. Internet neutrality is the right to the internet access, which should be offered to everyone on a non-discriminatory base without favoring certain websites or applications or services. Then there's also the right to data protection and data retention. These are two different things. So the right to data protected every time you use a certain online platform, but also the knowledge that you have on how this data is being used. And this is also a very interesting topic that we touched upon. Then we have more specific things such as the copyrights, because they were working on the copyright directive in the EU. And then also on online safety of journalists, for example, and also on the protection in general of fundamental rights in the digital online sphere. Main challenges, once again, around accessibility, inclusiveness, equality. But here we also had certain concepts such as corruption and censorship, and also the control of data and the freedoms online. How can we ensure privacy and data protection all the time? How can we also ensure net neutrality? So the proposed actions here, there was also the EU working on the e-privacy regulation. It has already been adopted, but it has to be also adopted by the member states as soon as possible. So civil society was urging for that. Also protection of highly sensitive information. So here, sometimes the internet can be biased, and certain information such as migration status, sexual orientation, race information, these can be actually used against you if the website, for example, is not protecting or retaining your data in the correct way. So the suggestion here is to restrict this access to this information as much as possible, and to make sure that only in exceptional cases you are meant to give this sort of data, like your migration status, your race, etc. So, apologies. So then we also had, to make sure that encryption, to protect the highly sensitive information, monitor any attempts to introduce practices that undermine net neutrality, and take regulatory action, ensure that encryption is protected on websites, build digital infrastructures, and ensure financial sustainability of these infrastructures, ban surveillance and recognition technologies. We had a very big debate here because we worked with an organization called EDRI, and they actually launched a European Citizens Initiative really about banning mass surveillance. Mass surveillance are all of those technologies that can recognize your face. When we had terrorist attacks a few years ago, this was a very big thing because the justification of governments was the fact that we're using this sort of facial recognition in order to basically find out, who were terrorists, etc. But then, of course, it is a big concern on privacy. Some of these technologies can be biased, etc. So the civil society organizations were firmly convinced about banning these sort of mass surveillance and facial recognition technologies. And the last but not least, to reform the copyright directive to also guarantee more access for people with disabilities. So once again, I invite you to go on the co-creation site. And here we have a few questions. Do you think everyone in the EU should have the right to free, affordable speed internet and access to technological infrastructures? Do you think your rights are sufficiently protected online? Is it clear how your personal data is used every time you connect online? What do you do if it is unclear to you that your data, how your data is treated? How should we ensure that all citizens know what their rights are? They're connected to the internet. So these are the questions that we have for now. And I'll give 5 minutes again. Okay, so we can start checking out the answers under digital rights. So do you think everyone in the EU should have right to free, affordable, high-speed internet and the access to technological infrastructures? So it's nice to see that 95% says yes. I would be curious to hear the person who answered no, why that is, because I think it's also very interesting to know the opposite point of view. I did see a question in the chat in which it also meant if one of the participants asked if this also meant to have public spaces with internet all the time. Can be, it doesn't have to be. What in Finland they did was just make sure that in any case, all citizens could have affordable high-speed internet. So it wasn't specifically about only having like also having like public spaces with internet, but I imagine that this also is an element that goes together with this. Then, do you think your rights are sufficiently protected online? Very interesting to see once again your opinion. No, this is actually kind of the same perception that we had in other countries as well. We ran this already in 5 countries, and most of the time for other citizens from other countries, it's no. Sometimes 23%, I do not know, 9%. Is it clear to you how your personal data is treated every time you're connected online? Once again, it's no, and it is the same kind of perception that citizens from other countries have had, which is actually quite, yeah, it is disturbing. Even after the whole GDPR regulation of the European Union, there is still the perception that people, when they get online, they don't really know what is happening to their data. And of course, this is done on purpose by online sites. And I myself don't know how my data is treated actually. And it's, yeah, it's very confusing. So what do you do when it's unclear? I avoid giving as much personal data possible. I read information to learn more about it. I use only trustworthy websites. To fight more for also the respect of private rights. If it is important to me that I use the platform, I reluctantly accept their settings. Fair enough. I think I do the same as well. In the end, if I need a website, I kind of accept everything. Not use the service, it can't be helped. I try to decline every demand to access my data. And if I feel unsafe, I stop using the website. I try to deactivate most of the cookies, publish my data only necessary, and usually reject all that I can and proceed anyways. Trying more, possibly not use the service. Unfortunately, I don't do anything. I reject data to transfer to other actors, and some people don't know. Yes, so there is a general perception of just confusion on what to do when you have all of those notifications online asking you to accept all these. What does it actually mean? It is a general, perception. How should we ensure that all citizens know what rights are when they're connected to the internet? So have a strong disclaimer online, a disclaimer page, a strong degree of transparency about how AI systems make systems also, strong possibilities for participation inclusion. It needs to be very easy for anyone to ask a question and to immediately get feedback. So even online chat solutions could help. Raising awareness among citizens, especially young people, about their rights online. We need funded campaigns to reach citizens, to build access to that information on platforms that they interact with on a daily basis, similar to official COVID information. So that's the degree of transparency that we need, that everything is very, very displayed. The link on every digital platform for people to access as an official web page with their digital rights, education in schools, and not only in schools, also non-formal education, I would say. Public bodies also that can help, such as customer protection agencies, national and European level, legally binding guidelines, etc. We need to inform people about basic vocabulary. So really, again, about digital skills, even to understand what a cookie is, because most people don't know, and what makes how to make the website more understandable when discussing data. There should be more protection on the EU level. There should be more digital education, awareness raising campaigns, better basis of self-evident consumer rights within the EU, digitalization in school curricula, simple language explanation. So you all agree that there should be more public awareness raising, more information, more transparency, better regulations, and better terms and conditions that are displayed and clear to everyone. So Sarah, I will just quickly give you again the floor.
Yes.
About this.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised that it is the focus on the measurements is like mostly on the individual level and the societal level, because I would say that it's a hard goal to make everybody that knowledgeable that they can actually understand all these processes. I think that they should be much more focused on government regulation, on transparency, because if we have open source and transparent softwares, then actually the few people who have a lot of expertise can see what happens to the data and can actually also press alarm if something is not used in the right way. Because I think with the digital world, it is a huge goal to make everybody an expert, and I don't think this will happen. So I think transparency should be the highest aim, and that the people who know about this stuff, they can warn the other people around it, and they can actually put pressure on governments to act more where it is necessary.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah. I agree. And I see a question from Frank in the chat. I'll just answer to that. So what is mass surveillance, and can you give examples, please? So this was, as I was mentioning, one of the things that civil society were really fighting for is to ban mass surveillance and facial recognition technologies. And these mass surveillance technologies are basically, for example, in airports, train stations, and things like that, like where there's a big crowd, and you have these technologies that can recognize the faces of people. The problem is that civil society has done research around this, and these technologies sometimes are very biased. Of course, they profile people according to race and other facial aspects that people have. So this is why civil society organization is trying to ban this sort of technologies that are usually in crowds, such as in airports and other big places. So I hope this explains. Okay, now digital safeguards. So here, maybe you'll find some of the topics interesting, because we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence as well. So when we talk about digital safeguards, we mean the safeguards that the EU regulators, so decision makers, need to put in place to respect values, ethics, and norms in the digital space. So the safeguards are, for example, EU policies, there are EU laws, EU regulations. So what are these digital safeguards, and on what should be they implemented? We had a few that we discussed. So cybersecurity, for sure. So the protection from hackers, frauds, viruses, the manage of hybrid attacks, etc. Then artificial intelligence, nowadays talked a lot about, of course, after ChatGPT. It is an ethical, we need an artificial intelligence that is ethical and that protects peoples and communities and society from the escalating economic, political, and social issues that artificial intelligence poses on our society. Then algorithms, why do we need rules there? Because we need more transparency on how algorithms are developed and how these algorithms are also used, a bit like with artificial intelligence. Then fourth, online disinformation protection. It goes without saying that we've been seeing a lot of this in the past decade. and it is the protection from false, inaccurate, misleading information that can be intentionally caused to public harm and to cause public harm and to also make a profit. So these were the concepts. Then we also had others around audiovisual media services. So regulation of these online content and online platforms, because these can hinder the expression of the freedom of expression and the access of information. Then also rules around integrity of elections. So making sure that we protect the integrity of elections and promote democratic participation. Online speech, online hate speech, again, the prevention of all of these practices that denigrates people based on their race, ethnicity, gender, social status, etc. And illegal content online, measures to effectively tackle illegal content. So main challenges here were all around these topics. Of course, how can we ensure cybersecurity? How can we make sure that there's an ethical use of artificial intelligence when it's implemented? How can we ensure transparency of algorithms? How can we monitor online disinformation? How can we ensure accessibility? And also, how can we monitor online hate speech? And here the discussions are always very, very controversial, especially when we talk about artificial intelligence. Here, maybe I could give you one of the interesting conversations that we had around this was around when is it that we need to regulate artificial intelligence, because it is very difficult. For example, civil society has been asking to regulate this, especially when it's about military purposes. So, for example, they fall upon the Common Foreign and Security Policy. We think that it is very important to develop a framework for human intervention in artificial intelligence. Now, one thing I would like to say, which was really interesting in our conversations, was this. Most of the civil society said, we always need a human intervention in artificial intelligence. But is that the case? Because I can give you one example that one of the civil society mentioned was the fact that on Facebook, there is artificial intelligence that already automatically eliminates any post, anything that is already detected as highly hateful, violent, etc. So this doesn't even have a human review. These sort of posts on Facebook, for example, are immediately taken out. And research has shown that if you have a human actually doing this, the person who is in charge of taking out these negative posts and violent posts and actually has a tendency to fall in depression. So after having this discussion, we thought that not all artificial intelligence need always a human intervention, but there should be a framework for human intervention in artificial intelligence. Because the case of this Facebook example shows that maybe sometimes artificial intelligence can replace this sort of task, because it could be very detrimental for the psychology of a person. So I thought that was a really interesting discussion that we had. Then another thing is to provide support, as usual, for civil society, technical, political, and financial, policy financial, sorry. Then defend fundamental freedoms and deter illegal hate speech. Then there's the Digital Service Act, which is being discussed at the moment. That's more technical. And then the member states need to transpose and implement effectively the Audio Media Services Directive. All of these are very technical, but it's just to let you know that we've been also pushing at the EU level for certain regulation to be enforced in the member states or improved as well. Here are a few questions for the digital safeguards. You can already start. How can we ensure AI and algorithms do not lead to discrimination? What can we do to set the rules on our values and our ethics on this? Are there any specific safeguards that policymakers should implement to protect vulnerable groups? According to you, who is part of vulnerable groups in our digital society? And what are their vulnerabilities? So you can specify which group has which vulnerability. Yeah, so these are the questions. I'll give you a few minutes to answer to these, and then we'll move to the last subtopic, which is digital education. Okay, I see a few people still answering. I'll maybe just answer to Frank's question in the chat before I start checking this. To what extent does mass surveillance reduce freedom? So in this case that I was talking about, the facial recognition, according to CSOs, it reduces freedom a lot. But the problem, I think the main challenge here is that there's always a trade-off between protection and freedom. And the main issue is always about how people in power and who detains the data and the knowledge, how this data and knowledge is used. Because while, of course, people are for this use of information, for example, to identify terrorists, it is okay if it stays within the scope, but you can never be sure if this data that is collected by people in power is then used for other reasons and other motives. So as I said, it's always very, very difficult as a question, because there is always, I think, a trade-off between protection and freedom. And no one has the answer to this question. And it is only about how, you know, people in charge and people who have the power to use this type of technologies, what do they do with the knowledge that they have afterwards, and if they stay amongst the scope of what they promise to do to people. So, but yeah, Frank, I mean, up to you also to create your own thoughts about, yeah, what are you willing to trade off in order to be protected? This almost sounds like a very difficult question that George Orwell was also thinking about. So. Okay, so let's see, how can we ensure AI and algorithms do not lead to discrimination? I'll just read a few of them because we're running out of time. Setting rules and controlling regularly, but AI returns stuff that we feed into it. So a very strict selection criteria can be the solution. Taking into account biases, avoiding that AI uses biased information. So who develops the AI is obviously very important. We need transparency, strengthening crowdsourcing in many areas. So co-creation of the AI, I would say, also between multiple stakeholders. A civilian oversight, so making sure that citizens are always, you know, monitoring how these AIs and algorithms maybe are developed, guided by European human rights. So also have different training, different also standards for ethical AI. Publishing and algorithms is mandatory, so how these algorithms are made, and an oversight commission, maybe also made of citizens and CSOs. Regulating them, harmonizing regulation amongst countries, setting guidelines, flagging threats, etc., and open source software. Are there specific safeguards that policymakers should implement? Filter out violence, inappropriate content, especially the ones used by minors. Include representatives from these vulnerable groups in discussions. So making sure that there's a co-creation process, again, including these vulnerable groups. Oh, there's an interesting example of a TED Talk. And reducing what children can use and see on the internet. And then to monitor also these terms, etc. Okay. Who are the vulnerable groups in our society? So the less educated, the poor people, people suffering also mental conditions, people with disabilities, people with substance abuse, search and aid groups, people with handicaps, disabilities, people who are marginalized and unrepresented, and also who also have a low income, low education, meaning lack of tools, lack of skills, children and elderly people, so the two different ages. A lot of groups, every group could be considered vulnerable. Less education, so these are all very similar. And yes, so as you can see, vulnerable groups is a very big group. What was interesting is that when I went to Strasbourg to talk to this about what civil society was asking for and what the definition of vulnerable groups is that in my group, there were these MEPs who were actually talking a lot about gender. And so thanks to civil society, they also opened up to other vulnerabilities, because we think that vulnerability is not only about gender issues, but there are many other groups that should be represented as well. Suffering from depression. So what are the vulnerabilities? Also online bullying, poor people, the access to the internet, and yeah, people with disabilities, they cannot access digital platforms. Aggressive phobias as well, lack of experience, elderly, refugees, people with deeply rooted sociological prejudice, elderly people, etc. Migrants, elderly. So thanks a lot for all of these contributions. I'll pass the floor to Sarah once again.
Well, I just could say something to the artificial intelligence regulation, and I think that the EU has made big progress in that. I mean, just now we have some regulation that's actually saying that if you have a high risk application, that means that there are decisions made that are really important for people's lives, like about which service you get, or like social service, or which support you get from governments, that these decisions cannot be made only by artificial intelligence, because and there has to be human involvement in the final decision. And I think this is super important, because artificial intelligence at the end just mirrors what we have on the internet. And if the internet is mostly prejudice, then we have also artificial intelligence, which is prejudiced. And that's why we cannot just trust what we get out of artificial intelligence, but there has to be safeguards for that. But I think the European Union is actually worldwide trying to make good regulations here, and it's a good example for trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah, for this. I completely agree. And we're almost done with our marathon of co-creation here, and we are ending up with digital education, so resetting education and training for the digital age. And here we have also a few different concepts that I'm just going to go quickly through. Digital education should not be too difficult to grasp as a concept. So we have the difference between digital competences and digital skills. Competences are those such as data literacy, online communication, online collaboration, safety and problem solving. While digital skills are more like job-related skills. So this is a bit of the difference between competences and skills, but obviously we can just use general terms. Digital learning. So obviously we saw this a lot during COVID, the use of digital tools in teaching and learning. The media literacy, how people access information online and how this information is shapes their ideas as well. And how do they critically evaluate this information that they see? And the last one, awareness raising, is also very important. So informing and communicating to citizens about digital practices. Again, main challenges: accessibility to digital education, digital literacy for all citizens, and data protection as well. Proposed actions by CSOs, training and EU programs on a wide range of digital skills. So the discussions that we had is that digital skills should also include soft skills. What are soft skills? Soft skills are the ones that are around the ethics as well. So it's not only about learning how technically a computer works or a platform works, but it's also how you need to behave on the internet. And this is something that has to be taught. So ensuring that these are tailor-made to the needs of the citizens, especially the vulnerable, including people with disabilities, elderly, people with lower income, lower education, etc. So more EU-funded programs for civil society to support digital education strategies, consult also informal educational trainers when developing digital education plans. So we think that when the EU or even in Germany, your ministry is creating a new educational plan, trainers, teachers should be much more involved in the co-creation of these sort of policies and all of these educational plans. The last is also around training teachers and public administrations, the essentials of digital technologies, softwares, and algorithms. And I don't think we've ever seen this more than these years in which we've been having COVID, on how uninformed and ill-prepared teachers were in actually using digital platforms, especially in times of need. So this is something that really came up from that discussion. So now we can start with the questions. Feel free to join the co-creation. It's the last one. So thanks for all your efforts. Are digital education initiatives in Germany easy to find and accessible for vulnerable groups? For example, if you would like to learn more about digital skills, is it easy for you to find in Germany, like a course, non-formal educational course, so that you can learn? Are you aware of any classes or informal workshops given on digital education? Are there opportunities for individuals and communities to have digital education after formal education? So formal education is, for example, when you went to school. So if right now you want extra courses, could you find them? And who could support giving free digital education to citizens? Who would you want as your teacher, basically? If you have any questions on a particular app or platform, who would you ask for help? Like, if you have trouble with your technological devices, who would you ask for help? Who do you think needs digital education the most? And what are your suggestions for ensuring that citizens have that digital education? Okay, so we can quickly comment on this and our event will be over. Our digital education initiatives in Germany, easy to find and accessible for all vulnerable groups? I'm not sure. So there's a lack of awareness if these are actually accessible. Not easy to find and not accessible, easy to find but not fully accessible, and both easy and mostly accessible. Are you aware of any classes, informal workshops on digital education? Most of you said no, but another 43% said yes. So there are workshops in Germany on digital education. Are there enough opportunities to attain digital education after formal education? So 58% of you said no, basically, where I do not know. Who could give digital education to citizens? So most of you think public institutions should be the ones giving these courses. And then also NGOs could play a good role in digital education as mediators between citizens, and also others or private companies, 0. If you have any questions on a particular app or a platform, who would you ask for help? A friend, a family member, an NGO, a private company, public institution. So most of you would just basically ask your friend to help you to solve this technological issue that you have. And then who do you think needs education, digital education the most? Elderly and refugees, primarily because of a lack of language skills as well. Absolutely true. This is a really interesting comment, actually. Senior persons without people without smartphones, and the elderly, those who grew up without, and those who just started using digital tools have more difficulties, of course. Young people and elderly. Most people think that. So most of you actually think that the senior citizens are the ones who need help catching up the most. Also because of their reduced mobility in later years, and they can't access certain services in person. Okay, children, especially of low-income families, lower education people, teachers, lecturers, and of levels of education, even some managers. Yeah, so also here, homeless people, unemployed people, yeah, and people with low income, etc. Okay, so you basically all agree that these are the vulnerable groups, especially elderly people. And then what are your suggestions for them having digital education? So more individual, tailor-made coaching and tutoring from people such as their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues. So more community, let's say, building around this. Public presentations, conventions, also in different languages. So again, the language barrier can be an issue as well. Start at least in formal education in schools, and then have more opportunities, both formal and informal. Okay, well, Sarah, did you have a few more comments on this before I close off the session?
Just one last comment. I was just surprised. I think actually that NGOs have a big role in promoting education on digital education in Germany, because actually the state is not doing it much. So it's mostly the NGOs who also point to the challenges and how to deal with that and leading that debates about that. But I think that should change. I think actually it should be a public responsibility to educate people on that topic. So, or they should give the NGOs more money for it if they don't do it themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are many NGOs working on digital education, so that's a good point. And okay, so thank you very much for this co-creation session. Actually, what we'll be doing also is that I'll stop sharing so you can see me. We'll also be compiling a report, and we will make sure that everyone receives this report. We're doing an individual report. So from what you said today, we're going to make it, but then we're going to another 4 countries this year. So that will make a total of 10 different countries that will have been. And then we will also make sure that in the beginning of next year, you'll also have the report on what happened in the different countries so that you can also compare the results and see what in general Europeans are asking the institutions to do. And next year, we're going to have also a very, very big campaign. And we will try to bring all of your contributions also at the EU level to the newly elected MEPs after the elections, the commissions, and see if they can take into considerations what citizens are thinking for the next, for their digital strategy in Europe. So thanks a lot. And then I'll pass the floor once again to Daniela. And of course, if you have any question or anything, please feel free to also ask Daniela or my colleague. And thanks again for joining us at this co-creation.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Thank you also, Sarah, for your comments there. I think it was really interesting to see the responses that we were more or less in alignment with each other. But I think what I'm really curious about is to see the other country reports to see how different that Europe stands against the other countries that you're also testing. So thank you very much for leading that, Elisa. I want to remind you now about a very important part of today, and that's the survey that we're going to ask you to take. So we're going to ask you to take your phone out again. And if you can scan this QR code for the ones that are in the room, you also have it on your agenda. And for the ones that are online, you have the website there as well in case the QR code is not working. And you have the QR code. So please take a few minutes to do that. We're just going to leave you now. We're going to leave this open, of course. This page is going to be here, but please have this open. You're going to need the information that's there in the yellow box. You're going to need that for the first page of the survey. So please do stick around for a couple more minutes. I know we're a little bit over time. For the ones that are here in person, we're going to have a nice little reception to kick off the weekend. For those of you online, we'll celebrate in another way. But please stay for a few minutes and survey. Thank you very much. And yeah, we look forward and we'll keep sharing the results with you all online.